I didn't hear the hedge cutter until it was too late. The high-pitched whine of electric shears sliced through my Saturday morning quiet like a swarm of angry bees, and by the time I rounded the corner of my porch with a mug of coffee in hand, Karen was already shoulder-deep in my property line. My hedge, the one I had been growing and shaping for 6 years, stood like a butchered carcass, stalks of green mangled, uneven, hacked nearly down to the roots. Karen wasn't subtle about it. She was bent forward, oversized sunglasses perched on her nose, wearing a floppy hat that made her look like she was on safari rather than waging suburban war. She caught sight of me and, without missing a beat, yelled over the buzzing blades, "It's community property. I'm just fixing what you let get out of control." Her voice was the kind that didn't ask permission but demanded agreement. I stood there for a moment, the steam from my coffee rising between us, and wondered, not for the first time, why she always picked me as her battlefield. My hedge wasn't on community property. It was 3 feet inside my line, and she knew it. But in Karen's mind, lines blurred the moment her vision of order was threatened. Her Bentley, which she always parked diagonally across her driveway so the neighborhood could see it gleam, sat like a chrome trophy in the sun just beyond her. I thought, briefly, about how fragile the balance of this neighborhood was. One loud complaint, one sudden cut, and civility crumbled. "You're trespassing," I said, voice even, measured. I've learned the trick with Karen was never to yell back. She thrived on sparks. If you starved her of fire, she'd choke on the smoke. But she just smirked, lifted the hedge trimmer higher like it was an extension of her entitlement, and made another loud chop that left a gaping hole in the greenery. "Your wild mess was lowering property values," she replied. "Everyone's been talking about it." Everyone, of course, meant Karen. And property values, in Karen's universe, translated to the perceived shine of her Bentley and the manicured angle of her roses. I took a slow sip of my coffee and considered whether to escalate now or later. Escalation was inevitable, but timing was everything. "Turn it off," I said calmly. "Now." She gave me one of those deliberate pauses, the kind designed to remind me that she believed herself queen of this cul-de-sac, and then finally clicked the machine silent. The sudden hush left the sound of birdsong and my pulse in my ears. "You'll thank me later," she said, brushing a streak of green from her arm. "Honestly, you should be grateful I take pride in this neighborhood when others don't." I didn't reply, because I knew she mistook silence for weakness. That was Karen's fatal flaw. She couldn't see patience as strategy. She climbed into her Bentley, revved the engine with an unnecessary flourish, and rolled away with a smirk that said she thought the battle was won. But here's the thing about battles. I don't mind losing the first skirmish. What Karen didn't know was that I'd already been preparing. This wasn't the first time she'd crossed into my land under the banner of protecting community standards. Last year she left flyers in everyone's mailbox calling my barn an eyesore. Before that, she tried to strong-arm me into cutting down my old oak tree because its branches cast depressing shadows. Each move was a test of territory, a subtle push against the boundaries to see if I'd fold. And each time, I let her win the small fights. Because small fights are distractions. I was waiting for her to overreach. By noon that day, neighbors started showing up in 2s and 3s. People always showed up when Karen made noise. It was half entertainment, half fear of being her next target. Mrs. Carter from across the street looked at the hedge and muttered, "She's gone too far this time." I shrugged. "Karen believes she's saving us from ourselves," I said, with a little edge of humor. They chuckled nervously, but I saw the relief in their eyes. They wanted someone to stand up to her. They just didn't want it to be them. Later that week, Karen doubled down. She paraded around the HOA meeting like a conquering general, bragging that she'd finally cleaned up the neighborhood eyesore. When I raised the point that she had, in fact, destroyed private property, she pivoted smoothly into moral high ground. "We all have to sacrifice a little for the good of the whole," she declared, looking around the room as if waiting for applause. A few people nodded. Not because they agreed, but because disagreeing with Karen was exhausting. She carried on about setting a new standard for the neighborhood, hinting that maybe some people weren't cut out for maintaining proper suburban harmony. It was in that meeting I decided the waiting was over. Karen had just given me the ammunition I needed, proof of arrogance in front of witnesses. And when arrogance meets leverage, the results are spectacular. The following morning, while sipping my coffee in the barn, I watched my neighbor Jim drive up in his tractor. Jim was a farmer by trade, but he loved to help me tinker with the machinery I kept on my property. He parked beside me, looked at the Hedge ruins, and said, "Heard about the massacre?" I nodded. "Karen's pushing for her biggest win yet," I said. "Which means it's time she finds out what happens when she bites off more than she can chew." He raised an eyebrow. "You've got a plan?" I smiled. "I've always got a plan. But this time, I'm going to let her walk right into it. Because here's the truth. Karen's Bentley was her pride, her identity, her shrine. She wielded it like a crown, flashing it at everyone as proof of superiority. And I knew one thing for certain. People like Karen always overstep when they think they're untouchable. All I had to do was set the stage, give her room, and watch her arrogance do the rest. By the end of that week, the Hedge was just the spark. Karen started leaving notes taped to my door with HOA letterheads demanding I comply with visual harmony codes. She didn't notice that no one else received such note. Just me. And every note I filed away like precious kindling. One day soon, I'd light them all up. The final straw came quicker than expected. Saturday morning again, sun just climbing over the rooftops, and I heard the unmistakable crunch of tires veering onto my gravel. I looked out the window, and there it was. Karen's Bentley parked half on my drive, half on the grass, her in a fury of hand gestures as she argued on her phone. She stormed out, pointed at my barn, and shouted, "This monstrosity violates every standard we set. It will come down, one way or another." She stomped back into her car and revved the engine as if her outrage alone could power it. That was when I realized she had delivered herself onto the stage I'd been setting. Because in my barn, next to Jim's tractor, was the perfect solution. And if Karen wanted to play demolition derby with my property, I would let her learn what happens when unstoppable entitlement meets immovable steel. Karen didn't stop after that scene in my driveway. She never did. That woman operated like momentum itself. Once she started rolling, she needed something or someone to crush under her tires. Over the next week, she turned her crusade from verbal tirades to action. She filed an official complaint with the HOA, demanding an emergency inspection of my barn, as if the wooden beams were leaking toxins into the atmosphere. She cornered neighbors at the mailbox and whispered about how unsafe it was to let a man with a barn live in the middle of a manicured cul-de-sac. One afternoon, she even brought a clipboard around, pretending to collect signatures for a petition to restore neighborhood standards. When I asked to see the list, she pressed the clipboard to her chest like it was a state secret and snapped, "It's confidential." The thing about Karen was she understood the mechanics of intimidation. Not logic, not fairness, just noise, pressure, and persistence. She knew that if you yelled loud enough, long enough, people would nod just to shut you up. And once they nodded, she'd parade their reluctant agreement like a trophy. I watched her work her circuit, noting each exaggeration she spun like thread from her own obsession. "That barn is a fire hazard. His hedge was harboring vermin. Did you see the junk he keeps by his driveway?" It was all nonsense, but nonsense has weight when repeated often enough. I didn't challenge her. Not yet. I let her have the stage. I wanted her loud, I wanted her overconfident. I wanted every single word recorded in the memories of our neighbors, so when the moment came, there'd be no confusion about who had been swinging the axe. My calmness irritated her more than any rebuttal could have. Each time she launched a fresh attack, I responded with the same quiet smile, the same slow sip of coffee. And like clockwork, her voice grew shriller, her gestures wilder, her complaints less tethered to reality. The rope was tightening, and she didn't even see it. It all came to a head at the monthly HOA board meeting, held in the community center across the street from Karen's house. She arrived in her Bentley, of course, late enough to make an entrance, and double-parked it so that half the vehicle stuck into the fire lane. She strolled in with her sunglasses perched on top of her head like a crown, clutching a stack of papers so thick it looked like she was about to argue a Supreme Court case. She plopped them on the table with a dramatic sigh and announced, "I have gathered overwhelming evidence that certain members of this neighborhood are undermining our property values." I didn't need a mirror to know the smile tugging at my lips was visible. She launched into a speech, waving photographs she'd clearly taken while lurking around my property at odd hours. Grainy shots of my barn doors half open, a zoomed-in picture of a tarp over some firewood, even one of my tractor parked by the fence, as if agricultural machinery was some kind of mortal sin in suburban zoning law. The board members shifted uncomfortably, nodding at intervals, not because they agreed but because Karen's tirades had a way of exhausting resistance. Finally, she pointed directly at me across the table. "We cannot allow one person's negligence to ruin the integrity of our community," she declared, her finger quivering with self-righteous fury. I leaned back in my chair, arms folded. "Karen, you're right about one thing," I said. "This neighborhood deserves integrity. And since you've been documenting so diligently, I'm sure you won't mind if the rest of us take a closer look at your evidence." Her eyes narrowed, but before she could respond, I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder of my own. I laid it flat on the table, opening to reveal the stack of notes she'd taped to my door, each one signed with her name, each one typed on HOA letterhead without authorization. The board members leaned in, murmuring. Unauthorized use of HOA stationery was no small matter. It was fraud, plain and simple. Karen's lips tightened. "That's irrelevant," she snapped. "We're here to discuss your violations, not my correspondence." But I wasn't done. I slid out another sheet. A letter from Jim, notarized, stating that my barn was fully up to code and inspected last year by county officials. Another page, receipts for repairs I'd made to the hedge only months prior, proving Karen's destruction wasn't maintenance, but vandalism. The murmurs grew louder. One board member cleared his throat. "Karen, these letters you left, did you have board approval for them?" Her cheeks flushed crimson, but she doubled down. "I don't need approval to protect this neighborhood." And there it was. The arrogance. The slip. She had just admitted to acting as judge, jury, and executioner, using the HOA as her personal weapon. I leaned forward, voice calm but cutting. "What you've done is impersonate the board. That's fraud. And vandalizing my property is trespassing. If I chose to pursue it, the legal consequences wouldn't just be fines, they'd be criminal." The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the sound of Karen's nails tapping against the table. She was trapped, and she knew it. Her gaze darted to the board members, searching for support. None came. I could have ended it there. I could have left her humiliated, her power fractured. But Karen wasn't the kind to retreat quietly. And I wasn't the kind to stop halfway. No, I needed her to take the next step, the overstep that would turn her arrogance into catastrophe. So I let her speak again. I let her rant about how I was twisting facts, how she was the only one brave enough to keep the neighborhood from sliding into chaos. By the time the meeting adjourned, her words had lost their polish. She stormed out, practically jogging to her Bentley, slamming the door so hard the echo lingered. But her pride wouldn't let her stop. I could see it in her eyes. She'd be back, louder than ever. And when she came back, she'd walk right into the trap I'd been setting. That night, I sat on my porch with Jim. We watched the fireflies spark across the lawn as I explained the final piece of the plan. He chuckled, shaking his head. "You're going to let her bury herself, aren't you?" I nodded. "The tractor's ready?" He grinned. "Always." The truth was, I didn't need to orchestrate much. Karen's need to dominate was a machine that ran without fuel. All I had to do was steer it into the right place. And that place, as fate would have it, was right in front of my barn. The following morning, the first sign appeared. A bold, red notice taped to my fence, claiming I was in violation of emergency zoning code. It had no signature, no legal backing, and it was written in Karen's unmistakable phrasing, every word capitalized that didn't need to be. By evening, I found another notice pinned to my barn door. Then one tucked under my windshield wiper. Each one more aggressive, each one an escalation. She was unraveling, and I documented every single piece of it. By the end of the week, I had a stack thick enough to choke a shredder. Saturday came. I woke early, the air heavy with that strange tension before a storm. Sure enough, at 9 a.m., the growl of Karen's Bentley rolled down the street. She pulled into my drive without hesitation, slamming the gear into park and storming out in a blaze of entitlement. In her hand was a hammer. Yes, a hammer, and she pointed it at my barn like she was leading a crusade. "If you won't take this down, I will," she declared, loud enough for the neighbors gathering at their windows to hear. My heart rate barely budged. This was it. This was the overreach I'd been waiting for. I raised my voice just enough to carry. "Karen, step away from my property. Right now." She laughed, a sharp, unhinged sound. "You've been warned. The Bentley's right there, I'll use it if I have to." She gestured to her car, and I swear in that moment she truly believed she could ram a 2-ton luxury vehicle into my barn and emerge victorious. The neighbors gasped, hands pressed to mouths. And me? I simply nodded toward Jim, who was waiting at the side of the barn, tractor idling low, its massive steel attachments glinting in the sun. Karen didn't know it yet, but the stage was set. And in less than a minute, her prized Bentley would meet the immovable reality of rural machinery. The neighbors must have sensed what was coming, because by the time Karen raised that hammer like Joan of Arc with a grudge, half the cul-de-sac had their curtains parted or their phones angled discreetly through windows. She thrived on an audience, but today that audience wasn't hers. Today they were mine. I stayed exactly where I was, coffee mug in hand, calm as a preacher at a funeral. Jim gave me the faintest nod from his perch on the tractor, the engine grumbling like a beast waiting for the gate to drop. Karen slammed the hammer against the side of my barn door with a loud metallic clang. It didn't budge. She hit it again, teeth gritted, shouting something about illegal structures. She was red-faced, sweating under her floppy hat, her voice ricocheting off siding and pavement. "If the board won't act, then I will. This eyesore ends today," she screamed. I raised my voice, steady, measured. "Karen, walk away now. That's trespassing, vandalism, and destruction of private property. Last warning." She turned toward me, eyes wide with the thrill of self-righteous fury, and shouted the words that would haunt her. "I'll tear this whole thing down myself if I have to." Then she did the unthinkable. She spun, dropped the hammer onto the gravel, and strode straight to her Bentley. The metallic door thunked shut, the engine roared to life, and she revved it 3 times like she was at a drag strip. The neighbors audibly gasped. She put it in gear, rolled forward a few feet, and then, oh, she actually did it, pointed that $100,000 wedge of metal straight at my barn. I couldn't help the smile curling my lips. It wasn't joy. It was inevitability. This was Karen's nature distilled into pure action, overreach powered by ego. She slammed her foot on the gas, tires squealing against the gravel, chrome grille aimed like a spear. She was going to ram it. My barn. My tractor. Me. And that's when Jim eased forward. The tractor moved with deliberate inevitability, like a tank on parade. Its front loader dropped low, teeth gleaming in the sun. Karen didn't notice. Her tunnel vision locked on me standing calm on the porch. The Bentley roared forward, but when she swerved at the last second to avoid the barn post, she cut straight across Jim's path. Steel met luxury in a clash so violent it echoed like thunder across the neighborhood. The tractor's loader didn't just dent, it sliced. With a hideous metallic shriek, it carved into the side panel of the Bentley, ripping through door and chassis as if aluminum were wet paper. The sound was something between tearing metal and a scream, punctuated by the shattering of glass. The car jerked violently sideways, half its frame lifted by the force, and then dropped hard onto the gravel with a sickening crunch. Karen's scream cut through the air, not of pain but disbelief. The Bentley sat at a grotesque angle now, its rear intact but its front half mangled open, almost severed down the middle. Smoke rose in lazy spirals, mingled with the hiss of punctured radiator fluid. Neighbors were outside now, full bodies on porches, phones openly recording. Someone muttered, "Oh my God!" Another whispered, "She actually tried to ram it." Karen stumbled out, her sunglasses knocked crooked, her hat lost somewhere under the twisted door. Her face was a mask of shock, rage, and humiliation. She pointed at Jim, at me, at the tractor, words tumbling out incoherently. You destroyed my car. That's destruction of property. This is." She couldn't even form a sentence. Her temple throbbed with each pulse of blood, veins standing out on her neck like ropes. I stepped forward slowly, careful, every movement calm. "Karen, you drove your vehicle onto my property with the intent to cause damage. You struck a piece of equipment legally parked on my land. The cameras," I gestured toward the barns-mounted security cams, "caught every second. And every neighbor here just witnessed it firsthand." I let that sink in before adding, almost gently, "Your Bentley rammed my tractor. Not the other way around." Her eyes widened, darting from camera to neighbor to smoking car. She opened her mouth, closed it, then shrieked. This was entrapment. She actually said it. The crowd erupted in murmurs, laughter rippling at the absurdity. Jim killed the tractor engine, swung down with ease, and brushed dust from his hands. "Lady, I was parked. You're lucky you swerved when you did. Otherwise, you'd be scrap metal under the loader." Karen's chest heaved. Her Bentley, her gleaming trophy, her symbol of superiority, now looked like a carcass on the roadside. The leather interior was exposed like an open wound, the roof crumpled, one door nearly hanging free. It wasn't just damaged. It was humiliated. A Bentley split by a farm tractor in front of her entire audience. For Karen, it was the equivalent of social death. She tried to salvage it. "I'll sue. I'll take you for every penny you've got. That tractor, this barn, it's all illegal." Her words had lost rhythm, collapsing into desperate shrieks. The neighbors weren't buying it. Mr. Carter spoke up, clear enough for all to hear. "Karen, you tried to ram his barn with your car. We all saw it." Mrs. Martinez added, "And you've been harassing him for weeks. Maybe now you'll finally stop." The murmurs shifted tone, from shock to agreement. For once, Karen wasn't leading the crowd. The crowd was indicting her. And she felt it. Her shoulders hunched, her jaw trembled, and for the first time in all the years I'd known her, she looked small. The sheriff arrived 20 minutes later, lights flashing down our quiet street, siren blaring once to scatter the gawkers. Karen sprinted toward him like a drowning swimmer spotting shore. "Arrest him!" she shrieked, pointing at me, at Jim, at the tractor. "They set a trap. They destroyed my Bentley." The sheriff raised an eyebrow, glanced at the car, then at me standing calm on the porch. He sighed, long and weary, like a man who'd heard it all before. "Karen," he said slowly, "you want to tell me why your car is halfway into this man's barnyard equipment?" She launched into a rant, hands flailing, words tumbling faster than they could form sense. He let her go on for a minute, then raised his hand. "Stop." His voice cut sharp. "I've already spoken to witnesses. I've already looked at his cameras. You're lucky you didn't kill yourself or anyone else. This isn't their fault. It's yours." The silence that followed was delicious. Karen froze, her mouth open, her eyes darting for an ally who didn't exist. The sheriff continued, "At best, this is reckless endangerment and destruction of property. At worst, attempted assault. You should be grateful we're not towing you in right now. She stammered. But my car, my Bentley, he cut her off. That's on you. Drive it off the property if you can. Otherwise, call a tow. The Bentley wasn't going anywhere under its own power. The tractor had done its work too thoroughly. A tow truck arrived hours later, and the sight of her mangled status symbol being winched onto a flatbed was the funeral march of her pride. Neighbors filmed, whispering, chuckling under their breath. Karen stood stiff, arms crossed, trying to summon dignity as if the spectacle wasn't her own doing. But everyone knew. The Queen had been dethroned. They walked the property with clipboards, checking beams, foundations, wiring. I followed calmly, handing over the binder of permits and inspection certificates I'd prepared. Every time Karen tried to interject, they waved her off. She grew more frantic. Check the hedge line. He lets it grow wild. Look at the tractor. It's dangerous machinery in a residential zone. The inspectors barely glanced at her. One muttered to me, "Does she do this often?" I smiled. Every week. After an hour, they closed their binders. Everything's in order, one said flatly. Barn meets code. Permits are valid. No violations. Karen's jaw dropped. She spluttered, "No, you're missing something. Check again." The inspector shook his head. "Ma'am, there's nothing to cite. You've wasted county resources. Don't do it again." He climbed back in the truck. The other followed, shaking his head. Karen stood frozen, her carefully curated authority collapsing. The neighbors applauded. Literally applauded. It started with a chuckle, then claps, then full-on cheers as the county truck rolled away. Karen turned scarlet, her fists clenched, her body trembling with rage. She screamed something unintelligible, stomped to her SUV, and peeled out of the driveway with a squeal of tires. I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, soaking in the shift. Karen had tried to wield bureaucracy as a weapon, and instead, she'd handed me the ultimate proof. My barn wasn't just legal. It was unimpeachable. And the neighborhood had seen her fail, loudly, publicly, undeniably. The neighborhood thought it was over after the county inspection. People whispered that maybe Karen had finally burned through her arsenal, that the spectacle of her screaming at county officials in pearls and a blazer had been her breaking point. But I knew better. Karen didn't retreat to recover, she retreated to reload. Pride like hers doesn't dissolve. It calcifies into something sharper, something reckless. And if the wrecked Bentley and the failed county ambush had taught me anything, it was this. Karen wasn't learning. She was escalating. The first sign came late at night, a week after the inspectors drove away. I woke to the faint sound of footsteps crunching on gravel. Through the window, I spotted a flashlight beam jittering near the hedge line. My cameras caught her silhouette. Karen, creeping with a pair of garden clippers, hacking angrily at what little greenery had regrown since she butchered it months ago. Each snip was a jagged punctuation mark, a woman cutting not hedge but dignity, trying to carve control out of foliage. I didn't go out. I let her flail, knowing the cameras would preserve the evidence better than any confrontation. In the morning, I filed the footage away. Another piece of kindling for the fire. Then came the spray paint. Big red letters appeared across my barn doors one afternoon while I was running errands. Sloppy strokes, dripping down the wood, spelling out illegal. The paint still smelled fresh when I found it. The neighbors pretended not to notice, but their silence screamed. Everyone knew who had done it. Karen's sense of stealth was about as effective as a brass band at midnight. Jim helped me scrub it off, shaking his head. "She's unraveling," he muttered. "This isn't even about rules anymore. It's about you." I nodded. "It's always been about me. The barn, the hedge, the tractor. They're just symbols. What she hates is that I don't bend." The HOA board finally tried to intervene. They sent a formal letter, not to me but to Karen, stating that unauthorized use of stationery, harassment, and vandalism would not be tolerated. She responded by blasting emails to every neighbor, accusing the board of corruption and collusion. "You're all in his pocket," she wrote, the font size increased to something you'd expect on a protest sign. "You're sacrificing this neighborhood's integrity to protect a man who hides behind a barn." Her hysteria was becoming impossible to ignore. The board president quietly confided to me that they were considering censure. But censure meant nothing to Karen. She didn't recognize limits she hadn't drawn herself. The breaking point came on a sweltering Saturday afternoon. I was in the barn, tinkering with a busted mower blade, when I heard it, the low, guttural roar of an engine revving far harder than necessary. I stepped outside to see Karen at the wheel of a massive rented pickup truck, chrome grille glinting, suspension jacked high like a monster prowler. She wasn't hiding her intentions anymore. She was parked at the edge of her driveway, staring across the street at my barn like it was prey. The neighbors froze in doorways, hushed, wide-eyed. Even the kids playing basketball dropped the ball and stood motionless. We all knew what was about to happen. She slammed the accelerator. The truck lurched forward, tearing across the pavement, aiming not at my hedge this time but straight at the barn doors. It was surreal watching a 50-year-old woman in pearls and sunglasses turn into a demolition derby driver, rage fueling every inch. But what she hadn't calculated was that the barn wasn't just a shed. It was reinforced. Heavy beams, anchored in concrete, built to withstand storms, not suburban tantrums. When the truck made contact, the sound was cataclysmic. Wood splintered. Metal shrieked. The grill crumpled like tinfoil. Airbags exploded with a muffled boom, blasting her back into the seat. The barn shuddered, but it held. Karen's truck didn't. Its hood folded like origami, radiator fluid gushing onto the gravel in a steaming puddle. Smoke poured from the wreckage as neighbors screamed, rushing forward with phones out. Karen flailed against the airbag, coughing, hair wild, pearls scattered like marbles across the cab. She pushed the door open, stumbled out, and staggered into the street. He reinforced it illegally," she shrieked, eyes wild. "That barn is a weapon. He's endangering us all." The irony was sharp enough to cut glass. She'd just weaponized a 2-ton truck against my barn, and now she was accusing me of turning wood into a threat. The neighbors weren't buying it. Mrs. Carter, usually timid, shouted, "Karen, you could have killed someone." Another neighbor chimed in, "This has gone too far. You need to be arrested." For the first time, the tide wasn't just against her, it was openly hostile. The sheriff's car rolled in faster this time, sirens slicing through the air. He stepped out, hands on his belt, eyes narrowing at the scene of twisted chrome and steaming wreckage. He looked at me first. "Cameras." I nodded. "All rolling." He turned to Karen, who was still flailing, shouting about illegal barns and community safety. His voice cut like a blade. "Karen, you've crossed a line." She froze. The sheriff continued, "Reckless endangerment, property damage, potential assault. You're lucky no one was hurt. But this," he gestured at the wreckage, "this is criminal. You'll need to come with me." The neighborhood gasped. Karen's jaw dropped. "You can't arrest me. I'm the HOA president," she screamed. The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "No, you're not. And right now, you're under arrest." He pulled out the cuffs. Karen shrieked, stumbling backward, hands flailing like she could swat away reality. "No. This is entrapment. I'm the victim here. He set me up." The sheriff ignored her pleas, cuffed her wrists, and guided her firmly to the cruiser. The sight was surreal. Karen, queen of the cul-de-sac, stuffed into the back seat of a squad car while neighbors filmed openly. Phones captured every angle, every second. By evening, the clips were already circulating in private group chats, then social media, then local news. Suburban HOA leader Ram's barn, arrested for reckless endangerment, was the headline on one site. Jim came by later, shaking his head in disbelief. She really tried to ram it again. This time with a truck. He glanced at me. "You couldn't have scripted it better." I sipped my coffee. I didn't need to script it. Karen always writes her own ending. But I knew this wasn't her ending. Jail would humble some people, break them even. But Karen wasn't some people. Karen was the type to sit in a holding cell plotting her comeback. And when she got out, the wreckage of her reputation wouldn't deter her. It would drive her. Sure enough, 2 days later, she was back. Released on bail, wearing a stiff neck brace and waving papers at anyone who passed by. "I'm suing him," she screeched. "He staged it all. That barn is a death trap. I'll take this to the highest court if I have to." Neighbors ignored her. Some laughed openly. But she didn't care. Karen wasn't fighting for the neighborhood anymore. She was fighting for her pride. And pride doesn't care about logic, law, or laughter. Pride only cares about winning. As I watched her pacing the sidewalk, ranting into her phone about strategic legal countermeasures, I realized something. Karen had nothing left to lose. No Bentley. No truck. No credibility. And that made her dangerous. Because when pride is cornered, it doesn't retreat. It lunges. Karen's neck brace lasted exactly 2 days. By the third, it was hanging loose around her shoulders like a costume accessory. She wore it not for support but for drama, adjusting it in exaggerated motions whenever she spotted a neighbor watching. She wanted to project the image of a martyr, wronged, injured, crusading for justice against a villainous barn owner. The problem was, no one was buying it anymore. Even the neighbors who once nodded just to keep her quiet had stopped entertaining her. They crossed the street when she approached, closed doors when she knocked. For Karen, that silence wasn't peace. It was betrayal. But if I thought social exile would slow her down, I'd underestimated her capacity for reinvention. Pride like hers feeds on humiliation like a furnace. It burns hotter, louder, more desperate. And sure enough, a week after her arrest, she unveiled her next weapon: fire. It started with whispers. Jim mentioned he'd seen Karen pacing near the hardware store, buying cans of paint thinner. Mrs. Carter said she caught the sharp tang of gasoline in the air one night when Karen dragged a red container across her driveway. Neighbors joked nervously, but I felt the shift. Karen's obsession wasn't symbolic anymore. It was turning physical. Dangerous. The breaking point came on a humid Thursday night. I was in the barn, checking the locks before bed, when I caught a flicker of light outside, a small, dancing glow by the hedge line. My stomach dropped. Stepping onto the porch, I saw her. Karen, crouched low, a matchbook in hand, the faint shine of accelerant glistening across the base of my hedge. She was muttering to herself, wild-eyed, as though narrating her crusade. "This will show him. This will restore order." I didn't shout. I didn't run. Instead, I clicked on the floodlight. The yard exploded in white brightness. Karen froze, match halfway to striking, her face caught in stark relief. Sweat, fury, desperation. Our eyes locked. For the first time, I saw fear in hers. Not fear of what she was doing, but fear of being caught before she could finish it. She dropped the matchbook, scrambled upright, and bolted into the night, her shadow flailing long behind her. I doused the hedge with a hose, my pulse steady but sharp. The accelerant hadn't ignited, but the intent was undeniable. She wasn't just vandalizing anymore. She was ready to burn. The cameras caught everything. The gas can, the matchbook, her muttering confession. I filed the footage, knowing it was both protection and leverage. But I also knew this: Karen wouldn't stop until something gave. The sheriff was back at my property the next morning. He'd watched the footage, jaw tight. "She's pushing into arson territory now," he said, shaking his head. "We can file charges, but unless she lights it, it's attempted, and that's harder to stick." I nodded. "So we wait." He sighed. "We wait. And we prepare." Prepare I did. The barn was outfitted with new cameras, motion sensors, even fire extinguishers mounted at every corner. Jim and I reinforced the doors, not because they needed it but because it gave us peace of mind. Every neighbor was alerted, phones ready, eyes sharp, everyone aware. Karen thought she thrived on secrecy, but the truth was, every one of her moves was spotlighted now. The whole neighborhood had become her stage, and every spotlight revealed her unraveling. She tried to shift tactics again. One morning, flyers reappeared on mailboxes, but this time they were darker, wilder. "Our neighborhood is under attack," they screamed in bold capitals. "The barn owner is building an illegal armory." Beneath the headline were photos she must have snapped through my windows, shadows of tools, outlines of equipment, cropped to look sinister. She claimed I was stockpiling dangerous weapons. The neighbors laughed, but the laughter wasn't comforting. Karen wasn't just spreading rumors. She was manufacturing paranoia. Then she staged a protest. Yes, a protest. She stood on her lawn with a homemade sign scrawled in red paint. "Stop the barn. Save our homes." She waved it at cars driving by, shouting slogans to empty air. Occasionally, a delivery driver honked, more out of confusion than support, and Karen took it as validation. She was unraveling publicly now, her desperation bleeding into spectacle. But beneath the absurdity was danger. Because one night, around midnight, I heard the roar of another engine. Not a Bentley, not a truck. This time, a rented skid-steer loader, one of those small construction machines. Karen had somehow managed to get her hands on heavy machinery. She drove it down the street like a conquering general, orange beacon flashing. My cameras caught it long before she reached my driveway. She stopped at the edge, revved the machine, and shouted into the night, "If the county won't take it down, I will." The neighbors woke instantly, lights snapping on, phones recording. Karen lowered the loader's bucket, pointed it at my barn, and gunned the engine. The machine lurched forward, awkward but heavy, tires chewing gravel. But what she didn't anticipate was that Jim had parked his tractor inside the barn doors that evening, positioned deliberately like a silent guard. The skid steer rammed straight into the reinforced doors, the loader clanging hard against steel, and the machine bounced backward with a deafening crash. Karen yelped, almost flung from the seat. The sheriff arrived within minutes. He must have been on standby at this point. Karen was still in the cab, screaming that she was saving the neighborhood from collapse. The sheriff yanked her out, her body thrashing like a netted fish. "That's it, Karen," he barked. "You're done. No more warnings. You've crossed into criminal destruction and attempted arson. You're coming with me, and this time, bail won't save you." The neighborhood gathered barefoot in pajamas, phones glowing in the dark, filming Karen's final meltdown. She shrieked as they cuffed her again, voice hoarse, words collapsing into raw sound. "You're all blind. He's the real danger. You'll see. You'll all see." Her voice cracked, broken, swallowed by the slam of the cruiser door. The lights spun red and blue across the cul-de-sac as the car pulled away, taking Karen into the night. Silence followed. Not the uneasy silence Karen used to command, but a deeper one, the kind that comes after a storm finally breaks. Neighbors turned to me, murmuring relief, disbelief, even gratitude. "You held your ground," one said. Another shook his head. "I never thought it would come to this." Jim, standing beside me, muttered the truth. "It's not over." He was right. Karen was in custody, yes. But people like her don't vanish quietly. They fester. They stew. And when the system inevitably spat her back into the neighborhood, she'd come bearing the scars of humiliation sharpened into new weapons. She'd already lost her Bentley, her truck, her credibility, her fake presidency. The only thing left to lose was control, and she would cling to it with both hands. As I stood under the quiet hum of the street lamps, barn doors still standing strong behind me, I realized something. Karen had burned every bridge, exhausted every weapon. All she had left was desperation. And desperation is the most dangerous weapon of all. Karen's second arrest should have been the end. The sheriff had hauled her away in handcuffs after the skid steer stunt, the neighbors had recorded every second, and the county had already flagged her behavior as criminal. For most people, that would have been the breaking point, the lesson that pride wasn't worth prison. But Karen wasn't most people. Karen was pride incarnate, pride that had been shredded, mocked, and dragged through the street. She wasn't plotting recovery anymore. She was plotting revenge. She was gone for nearly 3 weeks. In her absence, the neighborhood blossomed. Lawns looked greener. Kids laughed louder. Neighbors actually lingered by their mailboxes without darting inside. It felt like spring after a brutal winter. People stopped by my porch with pies, beers, or just grateful smiles. For the first time since I'd built the barn, the cul-de-sac felt like a community instead of a battlefield. But I never let myself believe it was permanent. Pride like Karen's doesn't dissolve. It curdles. And sure enough, on a cloudy Wednesday morning, she reappeared. No Bentley this time, no SUV, no rented truck. Just Karen on foot, her hair tied back tight, her face a mask of cold resolve. She didn't scream. She didn't wave papers. She didn't even look at the neighbors who froze mid-lawn mow or mid-dog walk. She walked straight up my driveway, stopped at the edge of the barn, and stared at it like it was a rival she'd sworn to destroy. I stepped out, coffee in hand. "Back so soon?" I asked, tone light. She didn't answer at first. Then she whispered, voice trembling but sharp, "That barn is the reason I lost everything. My car. My respect. My leadership. My freedom. Do you have any idea what it feels like to be laughed at by everyone you know?" I sipped my coffee. "Every day. The difference is, I don't try to ram barns with luxury cars." Her lips twitched, almost a smile, but it collapsed into a grimace. She stepped closer. "This ends tonight," she said. And with that, she turned on her heel and stalked away. The neighbors whispered, the rumor spreading like electricity. Karen wasn't finished. That night, the storm rolled in. Wind howled through the hedges, lightning split the sky, rain hammered roofs like war drums. I sat in the barn, every light on, cameras rolling, waiting. And right on cue, through the sheets of rain, she came. Karen, soaked to the bone, hauling something heavy behind her, a massive canister of fuel. She staggered forward, determination burning hotter than the storm around her. She poured the liquid across the base of my barn, muttering to herself like a zealot. "Cleanse it. Purge it. Restore order." The fumes burned my nose even from the porch. She struck a match. The flare lit her face in grotesque orange, eyes wide with manic triumph. For a split second it looked like she might actually do it. Burn the barn, burn herself, burn the neighborhood down in one act of pride-fueled destruction. But that's when the tractor roared. Jim had been waiting inside, crouched behind the machine. He fired up the engine, headlights blazing through the storm. The sound startled Karen. She dropped the match into a puddle, where it hissed out harmlessly. The tractor lurched forward, its sheer presence a wall of unstoppable steel. Karen stumbled backward, slipped in the mud, and fell flat, drenched and sputtering. Neighbors rushed out despite the rain, drawn by the noise and the lights. They formed a circle around her, phones out, recording every humiliating second as she scrambled on her knees, screaming incoherently. "He's the villain. He's corrupting you all. You'll regret siding with him." Her voice cracked, swallowed by thunder. The sheriff arrived minutes later, rain dripping from his hat, his patience finally gone. "Karen Whitfield," he said over the storm, "you're under arrest for attempted arson, destruction of property, and reckless endangerment." She thrashed as they cuffed her, screaming curses at me, at the neighbors, at the barn itself. Lightning lit the sky as the cruiser door slammed shut, the red and blue lights reflecting off the wet pavement like the final curtain of a play. This time there was no bail. The sheriff told me later she'd been denied release. Too high a risk. She was facing real charges now, not just citations or warnings. The neighbors shared the news in hushed tones, relief dripping from every word. Karen was gone, really gone this time. The next morning, the storm had passed. Sunlight streamed over the cul-de-sac, the air clean and sharp. The barn stood untouched, the hedge still scarred but alive, and the tractor gleamed in the light like a silent sentinel. Neighbors gathered on my porch with coffee, muffins, even champagne. Someone joked, We should throw a block party in honor of the barn. We laughed, not the nervous laughter of before, but genuine, full-bellied laughter. The kind Karen could never extinguish. For weeks afterward, life blossomed. Kids played basketball in driveways again. Couples walked their dogs without glancing nervously at Karen's lawn. The HOA board even apologized for letting her antics go unchecked for so long. They promised real elections, real transparency, no more self-appointed rulers. It was as if her downfall had cleansed the whole street, given everyone permission to breathe again. And yet, sometimes at night, I'd catch myself looking out the window, half expecting to see her silhouette pacing with a flashlight, plotting her next strike. Pride like hers doesn't vanish. It lingers. Maybe she'd spend years behind bars, maybe she'd be ordered into treatment, maybe she'd move away and infect another neighborhood. But here, on this street, she was finished. Her kingdom had crumbled, her crown melted down, her throne repossessed by the sheriff's department. One evening, Jim and I sat on the porch, watching the sunset bleed orange across the barn's weathered board. He raised his beer and said, "I never thought I'd see the day she went down for good." I nodded. Karen wrote her own ending. All I did was hold the paper steady. He chuckled, then grew thoughtful. Funny thing, though. If she hadn't cut your hedge in the first place, none of this would have happened. I looked at the jagged, half-regrown hedge and smiled. That's the thing about Karen. She always had to take one step too far. And in the end it was her Bentley, her truck, her fire, her pride, everything she used to fight me, that cut her down. The neighborhood was quiet again, but not the suffocating quiet of fear. This was peace. And every time I looked at the barn, standing tall and unscathed despite all her attempts, I thought of the lesson Karen had written in Steel and Fire. Entitlement destroys itself. All you have to do is give it enough rope. And so the story ended not with my hedge or my barn or even my tractor, but with Karen's pride split wide open, just like her Bentley that day, cut in half by the unstoppable weight of reality.